First up, China taking center stage on the world. China's vice president took the podium earlier today at the United Nations General Assembly, speaking on a wide range of issues from global security, climate crisis to cooperation, and even nuclear weapons. Nathan King has been following this all day for us, and a very remarkable day. And China, I think, set this tone in terms of what they wanted to say to the world.
Yeah, very much so. For you business types, Vice President Han Zhang said even though the global economy was recovering slowly from COVID, that China would continue to open up and also protect foreign firms and encourage investment. I think that would go down well south of here on Wall Street. In terms of other things, very much framing China's message around the social development goals, those 17 targets that are meant to be hit by 2030, the world is lagging behind, and saying, look, the Chinese Global Development Initiative launched by Xi Jinping 2 years ago, very much designed to help other countries achieve those goals. The Global Strategic Initiative, of course, helping create multinationalism around the world, away from hegemony. And when it came to the war in Ukraine, you know, and the conflict there, you see a lot of back and forth here with Volodymyr Zelensky, and he really reiterated that China could use its good offices to bring about what is needed, which is a cessation in hostilities and a peace plan.
Communication and dialogue is an important way to achieve international security cooperation, and parties to a conflict or confrontation should never forget this. Cessation of hostilities and resumption of peace talk is the only way to settle the Ukraine crisis. China supports all efforts that are conducive to the peaceful resolution of the Ukraine crisis and stands ready to continue playing a constructive role for the early attainment of peace.
He also reiterated the Chinese people's support for the people of Cuba, said that the U.S. labeling of that country potentially as terrorist is ridiculous, and supported the Palestinian struggle for statehood as well. In terms of China's foreign policy, we know obviously sovereignty very much at the heart of it, but also domestically, and a very clear message on Taiwan, saying essentially it has been China's domestic and internal part of China, integral part of China since ancient times. Let's take a listen.
China stays committed to safeguarding its sovereignty and territorial integrity. There is but one China in the world. The government of the People's Republic of China is the sole legal government representing the whole of China. And Taiwan has been an inalienable part of China's territory since ancient times. No one, no force should ever underestimate the firm resolve, strong will, and the power of the Chinese people to safeguard their sovereignty and territorial integrity.
He also mentioned human rights, saying that every country has their own different set of values when it comes to human rights, and none should be criticized for their cultural differences. And obviously, as a reference to the United States, said that no country should weaponize human rights either. But I think it was a very even-handed speech. It wasn't overly critical of the United States. And, you know, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but there has been a lot more diplomatic contact between Beijing and Washington in recent months and weeks. And I think the speech may reflect that.
Yeah, I certainly sense the level of sort of conciliatory, perhaps, is the world. Now, there were other speeches as well, Nathan, that I know you were following. Certainly part of the highlights.
Yeah, Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian Authority leader, very much laying into Israel, especially after the violence in Jenin and the settler violence against Palestinian citizens, and basically asked the question, which I think we can answer, that Israel, why isn't Israel sanctioned? Well, the large is the US uses its veto in the Security Council as much as Russia does when it comes to Ukraine. Also, William Ruto, the Kenyan president, very much putting his weight and forces, 1,000 police potentially for a police mission in Haiti. Haiti needs it. We could see a Security Council resolution on that next week, but it's going to be a very difficult mission. Haiti is racked by gang violence, and any country that goes in there has to look at the history of interventions in Haiti and pause.
All right, Nathan King, keeping us up to date there with all the news out of the UN. Thank you.
Phil.
Thank you very much. And for a deeper dive into China's role in the UN and perhaps the influence with the rest of the world, Jeff Moon, president of China Moon Strategies. Good to have you back. You know, Nathan mentioned this, but I listened to President Biden's speech there and now this one from China, and I can't help but notice that both went out of their way, essentially, to avoid criticizing the other, and that's very different than what we've heard from, I guess, other speeches in the past.
I think that's true. Biden's speech gave only short reference to China. It said that he wanted to manage competition and did not want to decouple. The Chinese speech was a bit reserved, but there was a heavy dose of the usual hegemony story, which basically means that any multilateral grouping that includes the U.S. supposedly constitutes hegemony, and any multilateral grouping that China leads or influences is, quote, true multilateralism. But that aside, you're correct that there has been increasing diplomatic contact, I think, and all in all, things came out fairly positively. One thing that I was pleased not to hear was the threat that we've heard in previous years that there could be an invasion of Taiwan. That was not in the speech as far as I know, and that was positive from the U.S. perspective.
Right. You know, on the issue of Ukraine, I mean, China has at several times attempted to be sort of the peacemaker, I guess, in a way, between Russia and the rest of Europe, and I'm going to include the U.S. as well, in trying to get Ukraine and Russia to perhaps talk more diplomatically about the situation, although it's been unsuccessful because we haven't seen anything on paper, but they didn't mention too much of that. What do you think China wants to have happen there?
I think that it is genuine and hoping that things will be resolved. But, you know, I mean, everyone realizes that China has become Russia's chief economic backer. And although China is not providing weapons, it's providing an enormous amount of economic support to prop up the Russian economy. So I don't think Russia is fooled. China's participation in the Ukraine situation has really caused a lot of tension with Europe, which feels an existential threat from Russia. So I think China, you know, has a very mixed message, to say the least, on Ukraine.
Very quickly, we did play the clip, but there was part of that speech that talked about opening up more to foreign investors around the world, and that's in response to some of the criticism that China's had about perhaps not opening up fast enough, specifically post sort of pandemic. And I did think that that was interesting in a sense that the timing of it.
It was indeed very interesting. And that part of the timing, maybe what you're alluding to, is that surveys from the foreign chambers of commerce show the least amount of confidence of doing business in China in decades. And on the one hand, there's been the premier and now the vice president that have made conciliatory statements about foreign investment. But on the other hand, the crackdown and certainly what the security services are saying is something quite different. So there is a real disconnect in terms of what China is saying and doing publicly and on the ground with respect to foreign investment. And I think a lot of foreign investments is very confused, and FDI has decreased precipitously as well. So I think China needs to get its message straight and then act according to that.
Do you think the challenges perhaps back at home, it's been well documented that the rebound perhaps hasn't been strong enough or as strong as some would have liked, and they've signaled or taken some steps to stimulate the economy, but overall they haven't used the sort of bazooka that other countries have had in the past, and maybe China, you know, can't just rely on domestic consumption alone, and it has to have more of a balanced approach in terms of investment.
Well, I think it does, but you know, foreign direct investment can really help. Companies like Apple that employ 1 million people could make a difference. So why is it that China is going out of its way to make statements that affect Apple's business negatively? As the Wall Street Journal commented, you know, a couple of weeks ago, you know, if Apple can't do business in China, who can? And I think that that's a really good question.
Yeah, Jeff Moon, there's a lot of questions, and we'll save that for another time. Appreciate your analysis on this.
Thank you.